Welcome, friends, to a heartwarming story of compassion and unexpected alliances. Enjoy the story. Principal Harris's office reeked of power and expensive cologne. The mahogany desk, the wall of academic credentials, and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured lawns of Wellington Private Academy all screamed privilege. Emma Stewart stood before it all, her back straight, despite the trembling in her knees. "Miss Stewart," Principal Harris's voice dripped with condescension, "while your enthusiasm for teaching is commendable, you must understand our unique position here at Wellington." Emma's fingers twisted the hem of her cardigan. 3 months into her dream job teaching English, and here she was, facing what felt like an execution. "With all due respect, Principal Harris, I was hired to teach all students, not to enable bullying." The older woman's perfectly lined lips tightened. "Let's be clear about what happened today. You, a teacher, deliberately humiliated Bradley Reynolds, the son of one of our most generous benefactors. After he poured milk over a first grader's head." Emma couldn't keep the indignation from her voice. That little girl was in tears, and nobody— "That little girl is here on scholarship," Principal Harris cut in smoothly. "Her presence in our halls is a testament to Wellington's commitment to diversity. But let's not pretend we don't understand how private education works, Miss Stewart. The tuition paid by families like the Reynolds makes those scholarships possible." Emma felt her cheeks flush. "So we're supposed to let their children terrorize others? We're supposed to handle disciplinary issues with discretion and professionalism, not by stooping to childish retaliation." Principal Harris stood, smoothing her designer skirt. 3 months probation, no bonus this quarter. And Emma, next time you feel the urge to play hero, remember, there are dozens of young teachers who would kill for your position here. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Emma could almost taste the bitterness of it on her tongue. "You may go now, and I trust we won't have any more incidents?" Emma nodded stiffly, turning toward the door. Her hand was on the knob when Principal Harris added, "Oh, and Emma, do remember to smile when Mr. Reynolds comes in. We wouldn't want him thinking we don't take his concerns seriously." Outside the office, Emma leaned against the wall, letting out a shaky breath. Through the window, she could see students crossing the quad in their crisp uniforms, some carrying tennis rackets or lacrosse sticks. Wellington Private Academy had been her dream job. Prestigious, well-funded, with students who actually wanted to learn. Or so she'd thought. The reality was more complicated. Yes, there were amazing students, bright minds eager to explore literature and language, but there was also this ugly underbelly of privilege and power where certain students seemed untouchable, their bad behavior excused with a wink and a donation to the school's building fund. "Miss Stewart?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Jenny from her freshman English class. "Are you okay? We heard about what happened in the cafeteria." Emma managed a smile. "I'm fine, Jenny, just thinking about some important lessons." "Like what happens when you stand up to bullies? Like how sometimes doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing." The bell rang, sending students scurrying to their next classes. Emma straightened her shoulders, checked her reflection in a nearby window, and headed toward her classroom. She had a job to do, probation or not. And somewhere in this maze of privilege and politics, she had to find a way to stay true to herself while keeping her dream job alive. The cafeteria incident had started like any other lunch period at Wellington. Emma was on supervision duty, watching the carefully segregated social circles that defined the school's hierarchy. The scholarship students clustered together near the windows, their second-hand uniforms slightly faded compared to their classmates' crisp new ones. The athletes dominated the center tables, while the children of tech executives and hedge fund managers claimed the prime real estate near the coffee bar. Yes, Wellington had a coffee bar in its cafeteria. Bradley Reynolds held court at his usual table, surrounded by an entourage of equally privileged fifth graders. Emma had noticed him watching Sarah Martinez, a first-grade scholarship student, as she carried her lunch tray past his table. Something in his expression made Emma's teacher instincts tingle with warning. "Hey, scholarship," Bradley's voice carried across the cafeteria. "Nice shoes. Did you get them at Walmart?" Sarah hunched her shoulders, trying to hurry past. Her worn sneakers were a stark contrast to the Italian leather that seemed standard issue for Wellington students. "I'm talking to you," Bradley stood, milk carton in hand. "It's rude to ignore people. Didn't they teach you manners in whatever public school you came from?" "Bradley!" Emma started toward them, but she was too late. The milk poured over Sarah's head in a white cascade, soaking her hair and uniform. The cafeteria went silent except for Bradley's friends snickering and Sarah's soft sobs. Emma felt something snap inside her. 6 years of student loans, countless hours of training about proper teacher conduct, all her carefully laid career plans, they all evaporated in that moment of pure, righteous anger. "Oh my!" Emma's voice was theatrically loud as she approached. "How terribly clumsy of me!" The carton of milk in her hand, her lunch milk still unopened, described a perfect arc through the air, its contents splattering across Bradley's perfectly styled hair and designer uniform. The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley stood frozen, milk dripping from his chin, his expression cycling through shock, humiliation, and fury. "I'm so sorry," Emma continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I must have tripped. These things happen, don't they?" From the corner of her eye, she saw Sarah trying to suppress a smile despite her tears. Several of the scholarship students were openly grinning now. "My father will hear about this." Bradley's voice cracked with rage. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Bradley," Emma replied calmly. "You're a bully who just learned that actions have consequences. Now why don't you go clean up? Sarah, sweetheart, come with me. Let's get you sorted out." As she led Sarah away, Emma could hear Bradley's friends already on their phones, no doubt spreading the news of her career suicide throughout the school's extensive parent network. She knew there would be consequences, but watching Sarah walk a little straighter despite her milk-soaked uniform made it worth it. In the bathroom, as she helped Sarah clean up, the girl whispered, "Nobody's ever stood up for me like that before." "Well, they should have," Emma replied, wringing milk from Sarah's hair. "Being rich doesn't give anyone the right to be cruel." "But won't you get in trouble?" Emma managed a smile. "Probably. But sometimes trouble finds you when you're doing the right thing." By the time the principal's secretary came to summon her to the office, Emma had helped Sarah change into her gym clothes and sent her back to class. The girl's grateful smile stayed with her as she walked the long corridor to face whatever consequences awaited. She passed Bradley in the hallway, freshly changed into his spare uniform, his father's arm around his shoulders as they headed toward the principal's office. Marcus Reynolds's expensive suit and commanding presence seemed to part the crowd of students like Moses at the Red Sea. "This isn't over," Bradley hissed as they passed. Emma straightened her spine. "No," she thought, "I suppose it isn't." The autumn air felt crisp against Emma's face as she left Wellington's grounds. Normally, she'd head straight home to her small apartment 3 blocks away, but today she needed to clear her head. The tree-lined paths of Harrison Park beckoned, promising solitude and a chance to process the day's events. Golden afternoon light filtered through the leaves, creating dappled shadows on the path. Emma loosened her sensible teacher's bun, letting her brown hair fall around her shoulders. The transformation from Miss Stewart to just Emma felt like shrugging off a heavy coat. "Maybe I'm not cut out for private school," she muttered to herself, remembering Principal Harris's thinly veiled threats. "Maybe I should have stayed in public school where at least—" Laughter interrupted her thoughts. Not the good kind, the cruel kind that teenagers produce when they're up to no good. Emma recognized that sound from years of playground duty. Her feet were moving before her brain could suggest minding her own business. Around the bend, near the duck pond, she found the source. 5 teenagers, all wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than her monthly salary, were throwing what looked like money into the water. A small figure, a girl no more than 8 or 9, was wading in, fully clothed, retrieving the bills while the teens hooted and hollered. "Getting warmer, little beggar," one called out. "Better hurry before it sinks." The girl was soaked to her chest, her teeth chattering audibly as she grabbed for another floating bill. Her clothes were worn, her shoes probably second-hand, and Emma's heart clenched at the desperation in her movements. "Maybe if you dance for us, we'll throw more," another teen shouted, waving a $20 bill. Emma scanned the park. noticing how other people hurried past, averting their eyes from the scene. Then she spotted them. Bradley Reynolds and his father Marcus standing on a path not far away. Marcus was frowning at his phone, seemingly oblivious to the cruelty unfolding nearby, while Bradley watched with a mixture of fascination and uncertainty. This is what it looks like, Emma thought bitterly. This is how they learn. The girl reached for another bill, stumbled, and went under for a moment. That was enough for Emma. She rushed forward, her teacher voice at full volume. "Get out of that water right now," she commanded, shrugging off her jacket as she approached. "What is wrong with you?" This was directed at the teenagers. "Do you think this is entertaining? She could drown?" "Mind your own business, lady." One of the boys stepped toward her, using his height to intimidate. "We're just having some fun." "Fun?" Emma helped the shivering girl out of the pond, wrapping her jacket around the child's shoulders. "You call torturing a child fun? What's next? Burning ants with a magnifying glass? Kicking puppies?" She could feel the situation shifting, the teens' amusement turning to anger at her intervention. They moved closer, surrounding her and the girl. Emma stood her ground, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Listen, teacher lady," the tallest boy sneered, recognizing her profession somehow. "Why don't you take your bleeding heart somewhere else before—" "Before what?" Emma challenged, pushing the girl slightly behind her. "Before you demonstrate what kind of person you really are?" The boy's face darkened. He took another step forward, hand raised as if to push her. Emma braced herself, knowing she should be scared, but feeling only a burning rage at the casualness of their cruelty. That's when she heard it. Footsteps on the path, and a voice that carried authority in every syllable. But it wasn't security or the police as she'd hoped. It was Marcus Reynolds, and he wasn't looking at his phone anymore. Marcus Reynolds moved with the fluid confidence of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. His tailored suit seemed incongruous in the park setting, but his presence filled the space like a gathering storm. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was quiet but carried an edge that made the teenagers shift uncomfortably. The ringleader, still riding his wave of bravado, turned with a smirk. "No problem, sir. Just teaching this little beggar about economics. Right, guys?" "Economics?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The shivering girl, Emma's protective stance, the money still floating in the pond. "Looks more like assault and harassment to me. Tell me, son, what's your name?" "Jason Blackwood," the boy answered, chest puffing slightly. "My father is—" "Charles Blackwood's son." Marcus's smile was razor sharp. "Interesting. I'm having lunch with your father tomorrow. We're discussing his company's merger proposal." The color drained from Jason's face. "Mr. Reynolds, we were just demonstrating exactly why that merger might need to be reconsidered." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I wonder how the board would feel about their CEO's son being filmed tormenting a child. These things tend to go viral, don't they, Miss Stewart?" Emma, still holding the trembling girl, watched the teenager's arrogance crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. Bradley stood slightly behind his father, eyes wide, witnessing a side of him she suspected few people saw. "Sir, please," Jason stammered. "We didn't mean any harm. It was just a joke." "A joke? Let's discuss humor then." Marcus's voice turned arctic. "I find it hilarious how quickly trust fund babies like you forget that power is a privilege, not a right. Here's what's going to happen. You're all going to apologize to this young lady. Then you're going to fish every dollar out of that pond. Yes, get wet, that's the point, and hand it all to her. Then you're going to leave before I decide to make some calls that would make your parents' evening very unpleasant." The transformation was immediate. The teenagers waded into the cold water, retrieving the scattered bills while muttering apologies. Emma felt the girl relax slightly against her side. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Emma asked softly. "Penny," the girl whispered, watching with wide eyes as her tormentors became her servants. "Miss Stewart," Marcus turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "I believe we need to talk about today's earlier incident as well. But first, this young lady needs dry clothes and warm food. Would you mind if Bradley and I accompanied you and Penny somewhere more comfortable?" Emma hesitated, looking at Bradley, who seemed unusually subdued. The boy who had poured milk on a first grader hours ago now watched the teenagers fish money from the pond with a thoughtful expression. "It's okay," Penny whispered, tugging at Emma's sleeve. "He scared the bad guys away." "My apartment is close by," Emma found herself saying. "I have some old clothes that might fit Penny, and I make a decent hot chocolate." As they walked toward her building, Emma noticed how Marcus kept himself between their small group and the thoroughly chastened teenagers. Bradley, instead of his usual strut, walked quietly beside his father, occasionally glancing at Penny with what looked like genuine concern. "Dad," he said suddenly, "what you did back there, that was like what Miss Stewart did for Sarah, wasn't it?" Marcus's step faltered slightly. He looked at his son, then at Emma, something unreadable passing across his face. "Yes, Bradley. Sometimes standing up to bullies means standing up to people like ourselves." Emma felt the weight of the day's events shift slightly on her shoulders. Perhaps there was hope for change at Wellington after all, though it might come from an unexpected direction. Emma's apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a young teacher's salary, small but neat, with walls lined with bookshelves and student artwork. She felt suddenly self-conscious as Marcus Reynolds took in her IKEA furniture and secondhand decor, but his face showed no judgment. "The bathroom's through there, Penny," Emma directed, handing the girl some old sweatpants and a t-shirt she'd shrunk in the wash. "Take a hot shower and warm up. I'll make hot chocolate." While Penny showered, an awkward silence fell over the living room. Bradley perched uncomfortably on the edge of her sofa, looking smaller somehow outside the familiar territory of Wellington's halls. Marcus stood by the window, his reflection overlaying the darkening sky outside. "Miss Stewart," he began just as Emma said, "Mr. Reynolds." They both stopped. Emma busied herself with making hot chocolate, grateful for the distraction. "I need to apologize," Marcus said finally, "not just for Bradley's behavior today, but for my reaction to it. I stormed into that school ready to demand your job, without even asking why a respected teacher would do what you did." Emma stirred the chocolate mixture slowly. "I shouldn't have retaliated the way I did. It wasn't professional." "No, it wasn't," Marcus agreed. "It was human. Sometimes that's more important." Bradley shifted on the sofa. "I'm sorry too, Miss Stewart, about Sarah. I didn't think about how it would make her feel." "That's the problem, isn't it?" Marcus turned from the window. "We haven't been thinking about how others feel. I've been so busy building my company, I didn't notice my son learning the wrong lessons about power." The sound of the shower stopped, and moments later Penny emerged, swimming in Emma's old clothes, but looking warmer. She accepted a mug of hot chocolate with both hands, sipping carefully. "Penny?" Emma sat beside her. "Can you tell us about your home? Why were you trying to get that money?" The girl's story spilled out between sips of chocolate. Her father, once a skilled carpenter, had lost himself to alcohol after her mother's death. The stepmother who followed brought more problems than solutions, using her fists to enforce her rules. Penny needed money for a school uniform. Her old one was too small, and the stepmother had spent the clothing allowance on vodka. "Dad tries sometimes," Penny whispered, "when he's sober, but Sheila just makes him drink more, and sometimes—" She touched her arm where Emma noticed fading bruises. "Sometimes they both get mad." Marcus's face had grown increasingly grave. He pulled out his phone, stepping into the kitchen to make a call. Emma could hear fragments. "Need a favor from the DA's office?" "Yes, child welfare." "No, this needs to happen tonight." Bradley had moved closer to Penny, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "My dad, he can help. He helps lots of people, when he's not busy being important." The last part held a hint of residual bitterness. "Is that why you live with your mom?" Penny asked innocently. "Yeah," Bradley stared into his hot chocolate. "Dad worked all the time, so Mom got custody. She says he cares more about his company than us." "But," he glanced toward the kitchen, "maybe she was wrong about some things." Marcus returned, his face determined. "Penny, some people are going to come talk to you and your father tonight. Good people who can help, but first we need to know exactly where you live." Emma stood. "I'm coming with you." "Miss Stewart, this might get complicated." "It's already complicated," she cut him off. "And Penny trusts me. I'm coming." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. He nodded. Bradley, you'll need to stay here. Mrs. Chen next door can— No. Bradley stood up. I want to help too. Please, Dad. Emma watched father and son look at each other, years of misunderstandings and missed connections hovering between them. Finally, Marcus nodded. Okay, he said, but stay close. Sometimes doing the right thing gets messy. Penny's neighborhood was a stark contrast to Wellington's manicured grounds. Run-down apartment buildings loomed like tired giants in the evening gloom, their walls tagged with graffiti, their windows dim with defeat. Marcus's luxury SUV looked alien among the rusted vehicles lining the street. Third floor, Penny whispered from the back seat, where she sat between Emma and Bradley. The one with the broken window. Emma noticed how Bradley took in the surroundings, his eyes wide at this glimpse of a world so different from his own. He'd unconsciously moved closer to Penny, as if trying to protect her from returning to this place. Wait here, Marcus said, checking his phone. Child services and the police are 5 minutes out. No, Emma countered. If we wait, they might hear the sirens and run. We need to keep them there. She turned to Penny. Sweetheart, what time does your stepmother usually start drinking? She starts when she wakes up. Penny's voice was barely audible. But she gets mean around dinner time. Marcus's jaw tightened. Bradley, stay in the car and lock the doors. Dad, that's not negotiable. His tone softened at his son's protest. Sometimes being brave means waiting to help at the right moment. If anything happens, call 911. The walk up to Penny's apartment felt like climbing to a confrontation. The stairwell smelled of stale beer and despair. Music thumped from behind various doors, punctuated by arguments and crying babies. On the 3rd floor, they found Penny's door partially open, voices spilling out. Where's that little brat? A woman's slurred voice demanded. Probably out begging again. Useless, just like her father. Emma felt Penny shrink behind her. Marcus stepped forward, his knock sharp and authoritative. Who the hell? Sheila, Penny's stepmother, appeared in the doorway. Her bleached hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared. She squinted at them. Who are you? Is James Miller home? Marcus's voice was pure corporate steel. We need to discuss his daughter's welfare. James! Sheila screeched. Some suits here about your brat! Penny's father emerged from the back room, unsteady but not completely drunk. His carpenter's hands were strong but trembling, his face showing traces of the handsome man he must have been before alcohol claimed him. What's this about? He spotted Penny. Where have you been, girl? Mr. Miller. Marcus stepped into the apartment, somehow making the small space feel like a boardroom. Your daughter was being harassed in Harrison Park today. She was diving into freezing water to collect money for a school uniform, money she needed because her clothing allowance was misappropriated. That's none of your business. Sheila lurched forward, but Marcus didn't flinch. Actually, it is. You see, I've already contacted Child Services. They're on their way. But you have a choice to make before they arrive, Mr. Miller. James Miller's bloodshot eyes focused with difficulty. What choice? Get sober. Today. Now. I have a place ready at the best rehabilitation center in the state. You'll get treatment. And when you're clean, a job at one of my construction sites. Your daughter will be cared for while you recover. Marcus paused. Or lose her. Forever. Those are your options. You can't, Sheila started, but James raised his hand. My little girl was in the pond? In October? His voice cracked. Something seemed to break through the alcoholic haze. Shame, recognition, fear. She was trying to help you, Emma said softly. She still believes in you. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. James Miller looked at his daughter, then at his shaking hands, then at the bottle on the coffee table. I need help, he whispered. Shut up. Sheila grabbed the bottle. Don't listen to these rich. The police chose that moment to arrive, followed by social workers. What happened next was a blur of questions, statements, and revelations about Sheila's record of child abuse in another state. Through it all, Emma held Penny, while Marcus efficiently orchestrated James Miller's direct transport to rehabilitation. Outside, they found Bradley had disobeyed orders and was waiting anxiously by the building door. Is everything okay? He asked, eyes darting between the police cars and Penny's tear-stained face. It will be, Marcus answered, his hand finding his son's shoulder. Thanks to Miss Stewart teaching us both about standing up for what's right. The following weeks at Wellington Academy felt like watching a slow-motion transformation. Emma noticed it first in Bradley, the way he started carrying his privilege differently, like a responsibility rather than a weapon. He began sitting with Sarah Martinez at lunch, helping her with math problems, glaring at anyone who dared comment on her second-hand uniform. Principal Harris watched these changes with poorly concealed confusion, especially when Marcus Reynolds's black SUV started appearing regularly at pickup time, not just for Bradley, but often with Emma in the passenger seat. I don't understand, Harris confided to her secretary, loud enough for Emma to hear as she passed the office. First the milk incident, now they're dating? The world's gone mad? But it wasn't dating, not at first. It was planning sessions for Penny's future, discussions about Wellington's scholarship program, and long conversations about education and privilege that somehow turned personal over coffee and takeout dinners. The teacher's lounge is buzzing, Jessica, the math teacher, told Emma one morning. Is it true Marcus Reynolds is restructuring the school's charitable foundation because of you? Emma smiled, remembering the late-night discussion that had sparked that particular initiative. He's doing it because it's right. Sometimes people just need to see things from a different perspective. The biggest change came during a parent-teacher meeting when Marcus stood up to address the room. Bradley sat beside him, shoulders straight, looking more like his father than ever. Wellington has always prided itself on excellence, Marcus began. But true excellence isn't just about test scores or college acceptances. It's about character. My son taught me that, with some help from a brave teacher who wasn't afraid to stand up to a bully, even when that bully was my own son. The room rustled with whispers. Principal Harris looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Therefore, Marcus continued, I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Wellington Community Bridge Program. We'll be doubling our scholarship spots and providing complete support, uniforms, supplies, tutoring, everything needed for success. Because privilege shouldn't be a wall, it should be a bridge. Emma felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Bradley slip his hand into his father's. Across the room, Sarah Martinez's mother was openly crying, clutching the program brochure that promised her younger children would have the same opportunities as their sister. After the meeting, Emma found Bradley waiting by her classroom. Miss Stewart, can I ask you something? Of course. Dad says you're coming over for dinner again tonight. He gets this weird smile when he talks about you, like he used to get when he talked about big business deals, but different. Bradley scuffed his shoe against the floor. Do you think... Would it be okay if what, Bradley? If you came over more often? Like, maybe all the time? He looked up hopefully. Dad's different when you're around. Better. Like he remembers there's more important things than work. Emma felt her heart skip. She and Marcus had been dancing around their growing feelings, both afraid of complicating the delicate balance they'd struck between their different worlds. That would be up to your dad, she said carefully. No, it wouldn't. Bradley grinned suddenly. Dad's totally in love with you. He's just too scared to say it because he thinks you're too good for him, which you kind of are, but that's okay because you make him want to be better. Before Emma could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. Ready for dinner? I thought we could pick up Penny on the way, show her how her father's doing in rehab. Dad, Bradley rolled his eyes. Just ask her already. Ask her what? To marry you, obviously. Before some other billionaire realizes she's the best teacher ever? The first day of the new school year dawned bright and clear. Emma stood on Wellington's front steps, one hand resting protectively on her growing baby bump as she watched the steady stream of students arriving. Her wedding ring caught the morning light, still new enough to make her smile every time she noticed it. The changes were everywhere, if you knew where to look. The parking lot now held a mix of luxury vehicles and modest family cars. Designer backpacks mingled with practical ones from Target. The invisible barriers that had once divided Wellington's student body were slowly dissolving, replaced by something that looked remarkably like genuine community. Mrs. Reynolds, Penny called out, running up the steps. Her new uniform was crisp and perfect, her smile bright. Behind her, James Miller walked tall and proud, 6 months sober and recently promoted to site supervisor at one of Marcus's construction projects. "Look what Dad got me for my first day." She held up a gleaming new calculator, the kind Emma had once heard Bradley bragging about. Speaking of Bradley, "Hey, Penny," he called from where he stood with a group of students, a mixed bunch of scholarship and full-pay kids. "Come meet the new girl. She's really good at soccer." Emma felt Marcus's presence before she saw him, a warmth at her shoulder that had become wonderfully familiar. "Quite a change from last year," he murmured, sliding an arm around her waist. "Principal Harris still looks like she's swallowed something sour, but she's adapting. Amazing what doubling her salary could do for her progressive views on education." Emma laughed. "You're terrible. I'm practical. Sometimes money is the best tool for doing good. I just needed someone to teach me how to use it right." He placed his hand over hers on her belly. "Speaking of teaching, are you sure you want to work until the baby comes? You could take it easy." "I'm pregnant, not invalid," Emma reminded him. "Besides, I want our daughter to know her mother stands by her principles." "Just like she stood up to bullies with milk cartons?" "Exactly like that." They watched as Bradley organized his group into a game of catch before class, making sure everyone was included. He'd grown over the summer, not just physically, but in the way he carried himself. The entitled child was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came from lifting others up. "He's going to be a great big brother," Emma said softly. "He had a great teacher." Marcus kissed her temple. "Several great teachers, actually. Penny, Sarah, you. Even that milk carton taught him something valuable." Principal Harris approached, her smile only slightly strained. "Mrs. Reynolds, the parent committee meeting is about to start. Will you be joining us to discuss the expansion of the bridge program?" "Of course." Emma squeezed Marcus's hand before following Harris. Some battles were won with dramatic gestures, others with patient persistence in committee meetings. "Mom!" Bradley called out. He'd started calling her that right after the wedding, testing it first in private and then declaring it to the world with growing confidence. "Don't let them cancel the mixed-income soccer league idea. It's important." Emma smiled. "Don't worry, I learned from the best about standing my ground." As she walked into the building, she heard Marcus telling Bradley, "That's why I married her, son. She's the only person I know who's brave enough to dump milk on a bully and smart enough to change the whole system afterward." The morning sun streamed through Wellington's stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns on the floors where scholarship students and trust fund kids walked together. Emma touched her belly again, thinking of the daughter who would grow up in this transformed world. "Your big brother helped change this place," she whispered to her unborn child, "and your mom helped a little too, with some milk and a lot of hope." Behind her, she heard Penny's laugh mixing with Bradley's voice as they headed to class together. Principal Harris was already launching into her presentation about diversity metrics and community engagement, but Emma's mind was on the simple truth she'd learned that day in the cafeteria. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of courage, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, they end with love.
"All right, everyone's presentations are done," Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." "Absolutely right." His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, Yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry." Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? "I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hope to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.